Okay, let's start. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the POLIN Museum. Today we are hosting participants and guests of the international conference, international session, Artistic and Architectural Research in Memory Studies, organized jointly with Zachęta, the National Gallery of Art. And this session accompanies Natalia Romik's exhibition at Zachęta, Hideouts, Architecture of Survival, as I said, currently on display at Zachęta, National Gallery of Art, which probably you have seen. I would like to introduce to you the speakers who will talk about the research. Dr. Natalia Romik will speak about hideouts, the architecture of survival, interdisciplinary research and art forms. And Professor Natalia Aleksiun will speak about objects concealed, material culture of Jewish life in hiding. The conference, the session is organized within the Global Education Outreach Program, and I'm really honored to welcome Shaina Penn, to whom this program is possible. The conference is supported by Taubie Philanthropies, William K. Bowes Jr. Foundation, and the Association of Jewish Historical Institute. Join us for the lecture, and after the lectures, I invite you to enjoy the glass of wine in the Warsaw restaurant, which is on the first floor of the museum.
Thank you so much. And we actually decided, Natalia and I, to flip the order. So my apologies to those of you who planned according to what is written. But I want to say this is an honor and an intellectual inspiration to be part of this event. Thank you, Natalia, for including me. And also this makes me feel extremely self-conscious because we started in the first panel by Professor Jacek Lociak declaring that history is not enough, and yet I'm going to treat you to social history. I hope I won't remind you of your nightmare high school teacher, but here it is. I do assure you, though, that what I've heard so far and this exhibition is very much on my mind, even if not yet expressed in how I write about the topic. And I was thinking that really what I'm presenting to you, and it's a chapter in the making of a book about hiding, life and death in hiding. That these are objects of survival. Just like architecture of survival, though of course this survival sometimes is a hope for survival that doesn't materialize. And here comes the historical part with dates and quotes. On August 1942, Dolina, today Dolina in Ukraine, a town that served as a seat of the Dolina County and belonged to the Stanisławów, now Ivano-Frankivsk voivodeship, awoke to the salvos of machine guns and rifles, signaling the ominous beginning of the Aktion. The previous night, the Gestapo, Ukrainian militia, Volksdeutsch and Baudienst manned all roads leading to the suburbs to thwart escapes. Before dawn, they entered Dolina and chased Jews out of their homes. Testifying for the Jewish Historical Commission in Przemyśl in 1945, survival Jania Rottenbach recalled a summer day in the town when, as she puts it, the worst happened. And here's a quote from her testimony. I looked in many boxes, dusted and otherwise, and I was not able to find her image. So this is the material remain a typed text. The town looked like a slaughterhouse during the Aktion. There was no place where Jewish blood was not spilled. Crowds of Jews were immediately led to the cemetery. Once there, they had to strip naked and stand on a board over a previously prepared deep mass grave. Several victims were shot at simultaneously, and as a result, only some fell in dead, while others were only lightly or severely wounded. The dead and wounded were pushed into the grave, and a mass of mourning people were covered in soil. After the Aktion, the Gestapo, Grenzschutz, and Ukrainian militia sealed the abandoned Jewish apartments from which all things were taken into a storage place. The clothes that the Jews had been forced to take off before they were shot at the cemetery were also taken to a storage place. Over the course of 3 days, most of the Jewish population, some 2,500 before the war, was murdered in situ, while some, the young and strong, were taken to a work camp where they died due to malnutrition, hard labor, and abuse. Only a few, among them Rattenbach, managed to escape and hide in the area. Rattenbach's testimony not only details the fate of individual families and the Dolina Jewish community, but also alludes to the centrality of objects. Those looted from the Jews in the course of the mass murder, handed over for safekeeping, and therefore concealed but separated from their Jewish owners, and those objects in hiding together with Jewish women, men, and children. Rattenbach places concealed objects or material culture in the center of Jewish daily life and death in hiding. She juxtaposes the looting of Jewish apartments with escaping barefoot and wearing only nightgowns, she and her daughter. Rattenbach notes in her testimony that during the Aktion, quote, those who looted and lined their pockets were not only those who participated in the murder of Jews, but also local citizens, many of whom helped to betray the hidden Jews. The majority among them were those who kept Jewish things handed over to them for safekeeping, or those who wanted to take over Jewish movable and movable property. They wanted to get rid of its legal original owners. One particular concealed object becomes the focus of Rattenbach's painful testimony and the site of memory, a kilim, a rug. And of course, I don't have a picture of that rug, but, oops, no, this is giving you away everything. But I have another rug, maybe that looks like that one. Upon hearing the shooting, still in their nightgowns and barefoot, she ran with her 6-year-old daughter to the forest while her husband hid in a field. Rattenbach and her daughter spent over a month in the forest before being captured by a militiaman. She recognized him and talked him into letting her and her child go in exchange for objects that she had left for safekeeping with non-Jewish neighbors. Having left her daughter with him as a guarantee that she would return, she runs in the middle of the night back to Dolina to recover some of the valuables. And she describes this. To my misfortune, nobody wanted to give back these things. In the middle of the night, I went from one to another, telling them that what had brought me to them at this late hour. This, however, did not move them. Instead, they were furious that I dared to demand the return of the goods that I was still alive. At one home, she was able to beg the return of a rug, kilim, which she took back to the forest to offer in exchange for the life of her child. Disoriented in the forest, Rattenbach interpreted the shot she heard as a proof that the policeman had murdered her daughter in her absence. In despair, she returned to the village and hid under hay for 6 days. Following this incident, her testimony becomes full of gaps, silences, and omissions. She glosses over material conditions in which she continued to hide in a forest near Dolina until liberation. So today, I don't want to focus so much on the issue of collaboration or what Elżbieta Janicka termed participating observers, the relationship with non-Jewish neighbors, but I want to look into material culture and in hiding and off hiding, objects that Jews took into hiding with them that helped them create temporary homes reconstructed on the run by men, women, and children who tried to survive. And I will focus on Eastern Galicia, today Western Ukraine, a territory that came under German occupation in the summer of 1941 and was liberated in the late spring, early summer of 1944. Indeed, in survivors' testimonies, diaries, memoirs, and oral interviews, Jewish possessions are ever present. In some accounts, physical objects came to identify the person and his or her particular struggle for survival. Here you see, that is, if I manage to go in the right direction. That's not the direction.
I don't know, where is the direction? So where is the...
Oops, yeah, that's the... So here you do see, here you see a hand-knit green short-sleeve sweater worn by a 7-year-old Krystyna Higer when she lived in hiding in the sewers of Lvov, Lviv, Lemberg from June 43 to July 44. With the help of Leopold Socha, together with her parents and her younger brother, as well as 17 other Jews. Krystyna had watched her paternal grandmother knit this sweater in the home they shared before the war. After the German occupation in June 1941, Krystyna watched from her temporary hiding place this grandmother and her young cousin loaded into a truck for deportation. Her grandmother waved in her direction, and the guard hit her in the head with his rifle. But this sweater really, in a way, epitomizes the whole experience, is her childhood in a sewers, but also her connection to the childhood before the war. And that's one of my points, how these objects have practical but also deep emotional meaning. Found in Jewish homes or taken on the road, objects could be both personal and familial, generic and imbued with meaning. Some were quote-unquote Jewish by provenance, used in daily lives, and we saw those daily life images recovered from Muranov in the first presentation, used in daily lives or family celebrations, while others were by virtue of birth, they performed religious functions and they were easily identifiable as Jewish. When Jews left their homes to move to the ghettos and to escape into hiding, they took some of these objects, some carrying monetary and some sentimental value, some both, with them. Things became a means of survival, since they could be traded for food and services, and as in the case of Rattenbach, at least potentially for life. They also exposed their owners to the greed of their non-Jewish acquaintances, neighbors. And I'm thinking here primarily about people who stay close to their original homes, so they don't travel far, and people they encounter if they go out or if they try to pass as non-Jews are people whom they knew before. Ultimately, those lucky few objects would emerge from hideouts together with their owners if they survived. What was indispensable to live in hiding, and what was the life of Jewish items that Jewish men, women, and children used in hiding? That was my original question, and I thought that this was a question of Alltagsgeschichte, simple question of, do you take a plate? Do you run with barley, or do you run with some cooking device? Did they have a particular hierarchy intimately tied with their owners? And more broadly, how did gender and class shape individual choices in keeping some objects at all cost, or is it all really individual and accidental in a way? I argue that various material objects, but also lack thereof, can serve as an important prism that refracts Jewish experience in hiding, and more generally during the Holocaust. So in Eastern Galicia, because of this particular location, the process of parting from objects began under the Soviet occupation. And again, a moment of deep tension. Yes. In her memoir, Gina Mer, born in Buchach in 1896, who owned a mill and lived a comfortable life in Gródek Jagielloński before the war, was gradually robbed of her possessions when the Soviet authorities turned her family into what Gina termed beggars. And she notes, we owned only personal and household items. It hurt us deeply as the entire work of the father and the son went to waste. We had no time for despair and meditation. It was merely the beginning. The loss of things and property signified a major loss of family continuity, generational continuity, and achievement, a sense of pride, a sense of status, a dramatic break. The speed with which their positions were taken from them startled Gina. Warned about their impending arrest and deportation, that is, by the Soviets still, they decided to move to a place where they wouldn't be known, and they packed their belongings. And I really love this quote, actually. So she says that the task of packing started, and it was extremely difficult. The house was arranged, she says, for years, and in each and every corner there was something, glass, porcelain set. At the time, everything seemed so important to us. Each painting was a part of our home. We clung to each trinket as if only everything in its entirety constituted the home which we wanted to transfer whole at any cost. Today, from the perspective of time, and she writes it after the war, having lost her only child, we think with a forgiving smile about our efforts then. It seems so trivial and shallow in comparison to what happened later. And this is also what happened with those items that she originally was able to save, to hide, to transfer. Once the German occupation begins and the roundups and abuse, there is a wave of temporary hideouts, temporary hideouts which have no need for concealing objects. That's my intuition, because people don't ever mention taking anything there. This was in close proximity to the home, sometimes in a home. The additional wall was made, or they were in the basement. So it allowed for keeping the objects in the original permanent habitat and just disappearing alone. Although when I was cutting this text to keep it to manageable length, I started thinking that when you then look closely at what these texts actually tell, narratively speaking, for example, the stories of smothering babies during a roundup, there had to be a pillow, right? So even though the objects are not at the center of these narratives, when you take a magnifying glass, you may start seeing objects there. But objects become really important when individuals and families start moving, preparing, running for what they hope to be permanent hideouts, sometime in Galicia, sometime in a spring, beginning in the spring and summer of 1942, and then definitely in the fall of 1942, when those who are still left realize that the roundups will continue, the deportations and the in situ murder will continue. And this is when two processes are taking place. On the one hand, people are selling whatever they still have to have resources to run with or to pay for hideouts, or they make selection of things that they absolutely have to have. And of course, these are practical objects, and this seems to be what, again, speaking about the elephant in the room, I started thinking a lot about journalistic accounts and testimonies from Ukraine about what people managed to put in a plastic bag when they were running. So it's primarily food, and very particular kind of food that can be taken, say, to a forest or to a barn, that doesn't require cooking, or if it requires cooking, then some kind of equipment, matches, clothes, but all depends on circumstances in which you run. So Aaron Wilf, who was running several times in his hometown of Skole, the first time when he runs with his wife and 2 children, he says he only takes 2 loaves of bread. That's all he grabs. He has no time for anything else. And then he prepares better. And then there are tools for actually making those hideouts that Natalia's exhibition presents so beautifully. Shovels, scissors, objects that often people cannot get from even friendly non-Jewish neighbors, because if captured, they would identify them. So they're seen as really a dangerous loan or gift. Pots, spoons, blankets, things that we can probably guess without reading the testimonies. But at the same time, there is a question of how much you can domesticate that space. And one of the hideouts in the exhibition is, of course, the Grotto, Esther Stermer's family group of 38 Jews. And I'm extremely grateful for seeing this space in a way for the first time beyond the text. But I want to add objects to that text as they are described by the grandmother, the matriarch of this group. So she mentions that her group had some furniture in both caves, quilts and pillows, ranked among their most important possessions. She set up in the hideout a section for washing, so there had to be something to put water in, which helped to turn the cave to sort of home. And daily routines are really only, I think, enabled by those everyday life objects, and make those daily routines plausible. And this goes not only to hygiene or cooking or food distribution, but also celebrating holidays. And this is where we go from, what is practical and what are the objects of luxury, of emotional, spiritual luxury. And these are often objects of religious importance, which are profoundly gendered at the same time. I think that the order is not right, but so Moshe Maltz's group of family members in Sokal have one prayer book, and there is also here a question of objects that are for individual use and those that are used by the whole group and sort of circulate, or the person in charge of this object that is responsible for these sacred rituals. And you would think that these are men, but not always. In the Grotto, in the case of Esther Stermer, she's actually in charge. I think the most, again connected to the exhibition, the most profound, I'm giving you away again everything. The most profound is the case from Żółkiew, described by Clara Kramer. It is the Torah scroll, right? They basically, this hiding place becomes a family shtibel, but also a prayer room, and then they have also a prayer book that is used that doubles as a diary. And once I started to look for these objects, I was actually surprised how many of the groups of people hiding together had a prayer book with them, and it was usually High Holidays prayer book. I'm not sure why, if this is what they would grab, or this was the timing of the roundups, that it was close to High Holidays, but that's what many people mention, if they mention objects. These, of course, have absolutely no use for an important aspect of objects of survival and concealment, which is barter. You don't only take things you wear or you eat, you also take things you can exchange for food, for salt, for life. And there is a whole process of parting from the things, not in a way of looted Jewish homes during roundups, but barter exchanges that go on for months between those hiding and those either hiding them or in neighboring village. And of course, there is barter also in sex, but and in services, but this bartering with valuables, often socks or shoes or coat, turns objects, gives objects very particular meaning. And now going back to the more complicated, yes, it's never the right direction, to more complicated, just like the green sweater, this is a pink silk slip worn in a hideout in Tarnopil, I believe. And I think we can play with it. On the one hand, in the description of the survivor, she connects it with terrible heat, with how she basically stripped herself just to this slip. But at the same time, it's a beautiful silk item. It's something that really belongs to her life of a housewife and a wife of a successful Jewish professional that she had before. But as far as clothes are concerned, they of course play a decisive role as objects that create an identity that one passes under. So in the case of Matti Hirsch, Maria Rosenblum, as she was known after the war, there is a sheepskin coat that she is given when she leaves the ghetto that starts her with her identity of a peasant Ukrainian girl. So it's not just she's no longer Jewish, but she's no longer a middle-class daughter of a very successful business owner that her father was in Kołomyja. And my favorite case of it is the blouse and also apparently a handkerchief of Dina Donia Pickholz, who is passing as a illiterate Ukrainian girl, working in a beer house in Bolechiv, and she plays this role very clearly with her clothes as well. She writes about how she would put that handkerchief over her head, how she would perform this, the items for the benefit of actually not only her own survival, but as a Ukrainian girl, she's hiding 2 more Jews who, until the end of the war, don't know that they are being saved by a Jewish teenager. I think we are now all most familiar with stories of increasing the Christian, Catholic, usually identity of those who are passing as non-Jews. These are crosses and medallions and prayer books, but also holy cards. This one was received by a Jewish girl on her class trip to Jasna Góra. I was actually, again, surprised that these would actually be taking place, right? Like a class goes and children receive this kind of memento of this very important, spiritually important trip. The religious objects that are Jewish religious objects, I don't want to paint a picture that, this is, everybody is deeply moved and passing the prayer book around and taking strength and hope for the future from it. There is actually quite a number of testimonies in which if there is in a group someone who insists on taking to the forest these religious objects, they are often seen by other members of the group as strange individuals. These are objects that are luxury. They are treated as almost a theological provocation, given what is happening around. So there are also testimonies in which owners and those that insist on using or having these are not actually being supported, or quite the opposite. We were here already. And 3 items that I'm still thinking of, which are the kinds of objects that are autobiographical sites. Diaries or notebooks that start before the war and continue through the war. People who make sure to take these with them, and you see in one material thing their life before, during, and sometimes also after. And I believe that these are extremely important, connecting the past and the present, but also connecting them with the future. And the kind of objects that I've been recently looking at that are taken into hiding, and I must say I'm still struggling with the rationale for it, but maybe rationale is not the lens, maybe the affect is the right lens, are autograph books. And I've seen a number of those of teenage girls who start them under the Soviet occupation, so they have inscriptions made by classmates and teachers and family members, and then in the ghetto, then they stop. One case is Klara Kramer from Żółkiew, whose hiding place is part of the exhibition, and some continue after. So there is a temporal connection in this material object, not only between the normal time and the time of the persecution and destruction, but also connection with what happens after. And last but not least, something that I don't see mentioned a lot in testimonies, but I was actually able to see it when a family member shared it with me. Szymon Kahane, who was a teacher in Lwów and who spent 2 years hiding in a small village, a fascinating story worth writing about in its own right, but among the precious objects he kept was his teacher's diploma. And what it tells me is that, he hopes to re-emerge from the war and be able to prove his professional credentials and return to his profession. Similar are descriptions of Jewish physicians who are hiding with their medical tools. Now, I don't know how far we can take this and how much there are professions that require documentation or tools, but they are definitely part of the toolbox that may go with people into hiding. And on a note of methodology and kind of intellectual autobiography with this subject, I must say, as I said earlier, I thought this was going to be a very easy part of the chapter to write, a predictable list of things with quotes to prove it. And the longer I look at these objects and what people put in the text, in their ego documents about it, and what they don't put into those ego documents, the more complexity I see, and the more it moves towards the history of emotions and not just a history of survival strategies. Thank you so much.